All right, everyone, welcome. Welcome to the Wagner Free Institute of Sciences Weeknights at the Wagner online talk series. I'm Susan Glassman, and I'm the director of the Wagner Free Institute of Science, and I'm really happy to welcome you tonight for tonight's talk, Sex in City Plants, Animals, Fungi, and More by Dr. Kenneth Frank. He'll be sharing his research from his latest book that looks at how plants, animals, fungi, and other unspecified life forms adapt to urban living, specifically how they meet up and multiply. Just a few words about the Wagner and some program logistics before Ken starts his talk. For those who are not familiar with us, the Wagner Free Institute of Science is a natural history museum and educational institution located in Philadelphia. We were founded in 1855, and we have a dual mission. We teach contemporary science to the public, and we also interpret and preserve the Wagner's historic building, which is a Victorian era time capsule of 19th century science. Tonight's talk's just one of many programs that we offer. And as it says in our name, the Wagner Free Institute, our programs are all free with the purpose of making them truly accessible to everyone. We do have a location. Our National Landmark Building houses a museum, a library, and a historic lecture hall, which is where many of our programs take place. We offer a wide variety of free courses and talks for adults, field trips and lessons for children, and we also have ongoing relationships with Philadelphia schools where we teach hands-on science. So as I said, this program is part of our Weeknights at the Wagner lecture series. These programs usually take place in our lecture hall, but we have also started to offer them online, and we're very happy to welcome Dr. Frank as an online speaker. So now I am happy to welcome Dr. Kenneth Frank. Ken Frank is a retired physician whose current research focuses on how plants and animals adapt to urbanization. He grew up in Arlington, Virginia, and he credits his lifelong interest in natural history to his early exposure to wild plants and animals. He did field research as an undergraduate at Amherst College. He studied mimicry in butterflies in Trinidad before he headed to Harvard to study medicine. He's lived in Center City, Philadelphia for nearly 50 years. And since he retired from medicine about a decade ago, he has launched and had an impressive second career as a naturalist and urban ecologist. He is specifically interested in how plants and animals adapt to city, which is what he'll be talking about tonight. He's been published in scientific journals, including Science, the New England Journal of Medicine, Entomological News, and the Journal of the Lepidopterist Society. His published books include Ecology of Center City, Philadelphia, and his most recent book, which came out in this past year, Sex in City Plants, Animals, Fungi, and More, the title of tonight's talk. I am very proud to say that Ken has extraordinarily generously is donating the proceeds of this book to the Wagner. So if you're inspired by tonight's talk, as I know you will be, and decide to purchase it, you will directly benefit the Wagner as well as Ken. I'll drop the book info and Ken's website into the chat so you can find out more about him. Last, a little plug for the Wagner. This program, like everything the Wagner offers, is free of charge. It's the Wagner's remarkable mission to make science widely accessible by being free. And that's something we've been doing for 167 years. So if you like the program, and I'm sure you will, please consider making a donation or becoming a member of the Wagner and receive benefits while you support a good cause. To everyone who already has contributed, we thank you. What we do is not possible without your support, and we're grateful. So now I'm happy to turn the program over to Ken.
Thanks, Susan. This is where I did most of my research. It's downtown Center City. And my primary interest was in urban ecology. But in the course of researching urban ecology, I became more and more interested in how plants and animals in an urban landscape manage to meet and mate. The organisms that I selected to focus on are all common. Many of them are found throughout the world. None is limited to Center City. The beauty of doing this type of research in Philadelphia is that there's a vast background of historical information that I can refer to. So that's one of the reasons that Center City has given me an unusual perspective. I'm going to start by referring to the Franklin Institute, which had a red-tailed hawk's nest that was started on the windowsill, and then they boosted it with a extra support. And this red-tailed hawk produced 3 young. The red-tailed hawk mates for life, and both members of the pair support the young. A news report starting in early May confirmed that the red-tailed hawk was missing from the Franklin Institute and confirmed dead. The Franklin Institute received word that the hawk was struck by a truck on the Schuylkill Expressway. The common wisdom was that the remaining female could not support those young, and that these young would die. So the Franklin Institute started a supplementary feeding, hoping that they could keep the chicks going until they fledged. And then out of the blue, a male red-tailed hawk showed up. And the big question was, what would happen next? Would this red-tailed hawk be accepted by the female? Would he be interested in the female? If he courted the female, what would he do with her offspring? Would he kill the offspring and mate with her? Would she chase him away? And later in the month, when I photographed it, this is the answer. The female accepted this male red-tailed hawk. He accepted her offspring. He joined in with the feeding of the young. And things looked pretty good. But in successive years, I'll just make a point that how did this new red-tailed hawk bond with the female? He presented her with a nuptial gift of a vole, and she accepted that. And presumably some pheromones that she was emitting or that he was emitting made this union possible. This is an area of active research in ornithology, and it hasn't been studied yet in red-tailed hawks. But the unfortunate thing is that this new mate died, and then from a rodent killer, and his successor also died from a collision. And this death of mates is typical of red-tailed hawks in cities. A book by Marie Wynn described this in red-tailed hawks in Central Park, New York City. So how does this urban mating system operate? It depends on floaters. These are unpaired males or females that circulate around, and when there's an opening, they pair with an unpaired mate like in this case. But this requires high population densities. And the interesting thing is that population densities of red-tailed hawks in cities, when studied, have exceeded the population densities in rural areas. This is a very different situation from what Alexander Wilson, a Philadelphia ornithologist from 200 years ago, described. He described the red-tailed hawk as being thinly dispersed, retiring deep into the forest to breed, and being shy and cautious. So how did we get from that description to what we have today? Well, farmers started to appreciate red-tailed hawks when they realized they ate more rabbits, squirrels, and rats than chickens. So the hunting of red-tailed hawks started to subside. Bounties were ended. Laws were passed to protect them. Field guides such as this promoted popular interests. Binoculars and cameras increase interest. Environmentalism, Rachel Silent Spring, and sanctuaries, the Hawk Mountain Sanctuary, all combined to improve the status of how we viewed red-tailed hawks in cities. So the real question is, did the red-tailed hawk adapt to us, or did we adapt to the red-tailed hawk? Or perhaps a little of both. The Canada goose is a different situation. The Canada goose never historically bred in Philadelphia. This is a photo of Canada geese in the winter outside Boathouse Row when the Schuylkill River was frozen over. Alexander Wilson postulated that the Canada geese bred somewhere around the North Pole. He didn't know. Canada geese were familiar to everybody because they migrated overhead. But where they bred was a mystery. They were avidly hunted. And when I was a kid, I was taken to, in the 6th grade, we had a field trip to the National Museum of Art. And this picture by Winslow Homer was shown to me, and I never forgot it, of Canada geese. If you look, you'll see closely a hunter, and there he is. You might think that the way Canada geese started to breed in Philadelphia, is that people stopped persecuting them, and so the geese adapted to the city. Well, that is not what happened. Hunters use live decoys, and Alexander Wilson described how this worked. They would shoot a Canada goose flying overhead, wound it, nurse it back to life, clip its wings so it couldn't fly away, and then develop a flock of these, which would then breed. When they bred, they lost their cultural memory for their ancestral breeding ground. Canada geese migrate back to where they first learned to fly. So if they first learned to fly in a farmer's farm, that's where they would start to breed, and they would lose their connection to their old breeding areas. In 1935, live decoys were declared illegal. They were viewed as unsportsmanlike. So these vast flocks that farmers all over the country had were given to wildlife refuge and game managers, who then released these now domesticated Canada geese around the country. And what we have here are the descendants of those um, flocks of decoys. And here they are breeding as they did when they were fully domesticated. There are still some populations of Canada geese that continue to migrate. Now shifting to feral pigeons, which also were once domesticated. They have full access to potential mates, form breeding colonies. But what's interesting, if you look at any flock of pigeons, is that they have a diversity of colors. And it turns out that they have what's called disassortative mating with respect to plumage. Mates picked mates that are different in color than themselves. And one theory is that that promotes outbreeding, but it turns out that recent genetic studies show that pigeons selectively prefer mates that are related to them. And on average, half cousins mated, even though they had fewer offspring than those that bred with non-related. One theory for why pigeons would mate with relatives is that the relatives share genes. So one way to propagate your own genes is to mate with a relative, and then the genes you share with that relative are also propagated. So how do these two seemingly contradictory observations fit together? One hypothesis is that the two opposing mate preferences each moderate the other. So by picking a mate that doesn't look the same as oneself, you're less likely, for example, to mate with a sibling. Switching to the cabbage white. The cabbage white butterfly is probably the most common butterfly in the world. It's present on most continents, and it is classified as invasive, meaning it's constantly dispersing. But how does a butterfly disperse to new territory, not knowing if there are going to be mates in that new territory? It would seem risky to venture out in an area devoid of possible mates. So the cabbage white has a trick for solving that problem, and that is the males emerge first. And once a female starts to emerge, the males cluster around her and immediately mate. So she's mated before she disperses. After mating, she will refuse to mate again initially. And here you see the male is on top with one spot on its forewing, and the female with two spots on the forewing is on the bottom. And her body language, tilting her abdomen up, is a sign of refusal. But eventually she'll disperse into a new habitat, and there she'll signal using ultraviolet reflections off her wings, males that are in the area. And if she is successful in attracting a male, she will mate with that male, and her offspring will be sired by that male rather than the male that she first mated with. This ensures that she is outbreeding rather than inbreeding. Ailanthus is sort of the prototypal urban tree, and it has another system for ensuring mating. The female Ailanthus tree produces flowers that are
First half
separate.
music. We'll talk more about it, but I'll just say a little bit about the prologue because we're not going to get a chance to listen to everything here, obviously. But the music in West Side Story is very complex. As I
I'm
mentioned
hearing
earlier,
some,
it incorporates Latin elements, cross rhythms, polyrhythms.
Yes, I will get
profiles
that
like
muted.
Ave rhythm or Wajira, which is a specific rhythm profile that we'll hear later.
Sorry about that.
okay. So the ailanthus tree has the male and female flowers on separate trees, and the pollinator has to go from the male to the female trees in order to produce seed. The problem is that what happens if you have an isolated tree like this? How is it going to attract pollinators that have been to a tree of the opposite sex? Well, the ailanthus has a trick, which it can vegetatively propagate and produce large numbers of trees of one sex. So here's a male clone in Mount Moriah Cemetery. And this is produced by vegetative reproduction. It produces a tremendous volume of flowers. And given this amount of flowers, a bee that comes here is going to be rewarded amply and will be able to find a similar clone of females. The result is tremendous fecundity of ailanthus. And ailanthus has become a kind of a metaphor for the triumph of over adversity. A tree grows in Brooklyn is based on using that metaphor. Here's another successful urban plant, Carolina geranium, growing in a concrete pavement crack. Very few pollinators in this area, and it produces these tiny flowers that are unlikely to be pollinated. This is each flower is about 1/4 of an inch, and this is a blow up of such a flower, and it produces starts out as female, and these yellow spatula shaped structures are the female receptors of pollen. And early on, this flower can be cross-pollinated, but not self-pollinated. As the day progresses, it has male flower parts that are immature here at the base. As the day progresses, the male parts start to move up and take and go on top of the females. And here you can see the male parts have now gone on top of the female, and you see little yellow dots, which are clusters of pollen, which are now coating the female. So the way this works is if no insect pollinates this flower, the flower now bisexual will self-pollinate. So the Carolina geranium has a fail-safe method of ensuring pollination. This is a common trick in urban plants. It produces these fruits. Each flower produces 5 seeds, and I figure there are about 500 seeds produced by this one plant. Given that number of seeds and the few spaces where these plants can grow, it can purge recessive genes so that even though it's inbreeding, it gets rid of inbred genes, and it can produce crossbred plants. Now, ragweed solves the problem of lack of pollinators by being wind pollinated. When we inhale ragweed pollen, we're really inhaling the male gamete of the ragweed. And the ragweed flower is this bell-shaped structure. which contains, you can't see it, lots of pollen. And it discharges pollen to these female flowers, which are filamentous structures that receive the pollen. The ragweed is self-incompatible, meaning that it can't exactly self-pollinate. So wind blows the pollen to a different plant and results in cross-pollination. Early on, you see very few pollen grains on this stigma, the female pollen receptor. But as time goes by, the pollen grains build up on the female receptor, as you can see here. Then this becomes what I call a reproductive lottery, because only one of these pollen grains can fertilize the female flower, because each flower has only one seed. So which is the winner of this lottery? And the winner is really the plant or the genotype of the plant that makes the most pollen. The result theoretically is runaway competition among ragweed plants to keep making pollen so that you can be the plant that makes the most pollen and is most likely to pollinate a flower. In Indianapolis, in the 1930s, there were 7,000 pollen grains per square centimeter. There are about 4 square centimeters for a postage stamp. So maybe 28,000 pollen grains for the postage stamp size area. It was showing you at the astronomical levels of pollen potentially produced by these plants. Well, this results in male-female competition for resources. The females are competing with the males for sugar and energy, but while the males are going haywire with this competition, the only thing that restrains them is the fact that if the plants produce no eggs, no seeds, this competition doesn't work. There's another way that the male and female competition causes problems, is that although the plant is self-incompatible, it's not 100%. So some pollen drops down and contaminates the female pollen receptors of the same plant. So the ragweed has figured out a way to reduce this conflict between males and females by having some plants that produce only female flowers, such as this one. Now, sexual conflict involves not only plants, but also insects. Here is a fragment of habitat in Center City. It's a walkway along a courtyard lined with row houses, each of which has its own garden. And at the end of that walkway is a particularly beautiful garden which attracts lots of insects. And here is a praying mantis eating a painted lady butterfly on a butterfly bush in that garden. And the wings of this praying mantis are short and it can't fly. So it's kind of trapped in that garden. It's got houses on 2 sides and a big wall on the rear and a long walk down the walkway. So here it is. How is it going to attract a mate? Well, it can use pheromone to attract a mate. But the problem is that towards the end of the season, this available prey for this praying mantis may start to shrink. So it attracts a mate. And here you see it's the male praying mantis, which can fly, it has much longer wings, has flown in, is mating with this female. By the way, this is my neighbor, Louis Jusso, who photographed this for me. And the female will go ahead and wind up eating this mate. She probably has been malnourished in that courtyard and is making up for it by getting extra nourishment. Now, this is not entirely bad for the male, because by sacrificing himself, he's supporting nutritionally, hopefully, the mother of his offspring, although he can't be assured that she isn't going to mate again with another male. Experiments have shown that when these female praying mantises are really hungry, they will eat males without mating with them, and the male gains nothing in that. So here's an egg sac, or a collection of eggs on the wall of this garden. And you can imagine what's going to happen. This egg case holds hundreds of potential larvae, and they're also going to be trapped in this fragment of urban habitat. Here's a hatchling emerging from an egg case. So what happens when there are hundreds of these hatchlings that grow up in a fragment of urban habitat, trapped, and what are they going to eat? Well, in this case, they will eat each other. And this is a female praying mantis eating another female. Well, how do you avoid the cost of this conflict? Well, this is a common milkweed plant, and it is the host plant to a milkweed aphid. And milkweed aphids cannot survive over the winter in Philadelphia. So they are blown in or fly in and have to start a new colony every year. They can't really afford to spend much time mating. Well, they have solved this problem. They don't mate, and there are no males. They reproduce exclusively asexually, very efficient. So every milkweed aphid produces daughters, and there are no milkweed aphids that are males, and their daughters will produce daughters. So the way this thing works is embryos form within the milkweed aphid without fertilizations, and daughters are born pregnant. And they can be born pregnant because they don't need to be fertilized. Normally, you have to be born before you can be fertilized. But these can produce embryos from eggs without fertilization. So the mothers of these daughters are carrying their daughters and their granddaughters at the same time. This phenomenon is called telescoping of generations, and it's a great way to produce a lot of offspring in a hurry. Here's a eastern cottonwood tree, and it's the host to a poplar leaf aphid, and I have photographed a live birth of a poplar leaf aphid. This aphid reproduces asexually like the milkweed aphid, except at the end of the season, it shifts into sexual reproduction. So this one cycles back and forth between asexual and sexual. So it gets the benefit of having rapid reproduction and also the benefit of genetic recombination and genetic diversity. This is an American cockroach, which is actually not native to America. The females normally mate, But in the laboratory, if you deprive them of mates, they will produce offspring indefinitely, females, without mating. This is a female oriental cockroach, also native to Africa. It normally mates, but if deprived of mates, its offspring will, it produces offspring, daughters, but those daughters have to mate. They cannot do the same trick that their mother did. Now, dandelion is another example of an organism in the city which have avoided the whole problem of sexual reproduction. There it is, dandelion on the sidewalk crack. And this sidewalk is a very poor place to find a pollinator. As you can imagine, there are not a lot of butterflies flitting around that sidewalk. This is right in front of our house. Here's close up, and here it's growing. And here's the dandelion, and it went on to make this seed head without being pollinated. And the amazing thing about dandelions is they attract pollinators, as this picture shows. And yet these pollinators are not pollinating the dandelion. They may pick up some nectar, they may pick up some pollen, but this is a clone. This is a dandelion clone. Well, dandelion is one of the great successful plants in North America, and it populates diverse habitats. So how does a clone populate diverse habitats? Genetic studies show that the dandelion clones are genetically diverse, but you'd think they would all be identical. Well, dandelion has a trick that has taken a lot of research to figure out, and that's that in Europe, where dandelion is native, dandelion and dandelion clones can fertilize sexual dandelions, and the offspring from these clone sexual matings produce diverse dandelion clones. And these dandelion clones then get imported into North America, producing diverse clones that can populate diverse genetic habitats. Well, here's a wall that would seem uninhabitable by most plants and most animals. It's the north wall of the Eastern State Penitentiary. And on this wall is growing purple cliffbreak fern, which reproduces without fertilization, just like dandelion. These are spore capsules filled with spores that will disperse. Here is the same fern propagating on a stone railroad pier in Penn Park. Well, silver maple has a problem that has solved, and that's that in downtown areas, habitats are always in flux. You never know when you're born what kind of habitat you'll have when you mature. Here's a silver maple that's volunteered in a planter, but silver maple is probably happiest when it's growing on the Schuylkill riverbank. It also grows on as a street tree and as a volunteer in side alleyways. Well, silver maple produces trees with only female flowers, trees with only male flowers, and some trees that are bisexual that produce both male flowers and female flowers. And the thing is that these trees can switch. So trees that are only female can convert to bisexual trees, and trees that are bisexual can convert to trees that are only female. So what would be the advantage of making this conversion? Well, if you're growing on the Schuylkill Riverbank and you're in a perfect setting, you might want to self-pollinate because you're ideally genetically suited to your habitat. But if you're growing in if you're poorly adapted to the habitat that you happen to be in, you might prefer to be a female flower, which has to be cross-pollinated, so your offspring will have different genes. So here's a seed-bearing tree, and the question is, well, which kind of tree is this? If you look at the base, it's rotting. So the advantage you'd think theoretically would be for this tree to be a female so that its offspring would have outside genes that might be resistant to whatever is causing this rot. And indeed, that was the case. This tree produced only female flowers. Now we're switching to a plant called liverworts, which inhabit cracks in pavement, particularly brick pavements. The term liverwort is from a medieval idea that a plant was named after something it looked like, and supposedly these looked like liver. This is a colony of these liverworts inhabiting a sidewalk crack. You can see here the big flat things are males, and the little thing here is a female. And close up, these are sperm platforms. Remember, these plants produce no pollen. They produce no flowers. So they fertilize by sperm, and they produce them on these platforms, which are on stalks. I'm going to take a time out here to just alert you. If you get on your hands and knees and start to look at liverworts, your neighbors might start to wonder what you're doing, whether you're from licenses and inspections or the health inspector, or maybe you're going to sue them because of someone tripped on your sidewalk. So I always try to be ready when I'm doing this kind of work to prepare a worried neighbor for what I'm doing. The problem is that gets into a discussion because they always, when I tell them what I'm looking at and tell them I'm studying liverworts, they hear liverworts. So this is one of the challenges of doing urban ecology, is working with people as well as the plants and animals. So this is the male, and it has to pollinate, it has to fertilize as female, and it does so by producing a two-tailed sperm. And this sperm can only travel in water, so it has to have water, and it can only go 3 centimeters. So how does this little plant manage to reproduce? Well, for one thing, it produces lots of sperm, about 5 million. But even so, it's a hard thing to do. But it can reproduce the way Ailanthus did. It can reproduce vegetatively. So each male plant can produce lots of male plants, and each female plant can produce lots of female plants. And that increases the target and the chances of fertilization. In addition, when they do fertilize, they produce these heads of spores, each producing 7 million spores. And if you think of a colony producing, say, 1,000 plants, that's a billion spores, and they can diffuse into the air. And you begin to see how this plant might propagate in the city. Here's a colony close up. So here you see the liverwort has colonized these cracks, and these cracks fill up with water, and the sperm then have a channel that they can swim in, directing them to the females. So the sidewalk cracks become mating corridors and a perfect setup for these reproducing liverworts. But also pedestrians can pick up the spores and the vegetative propagules and disperse them. And these are pests of greenhouses, and these liverworts are probably dispersed by potted plants. So all in all, if you review all the different ways the liverwort has to propagate, you can begin to understand why it's worldwide in distribution, and why, with such a complicated mating system, it still breeds in downtown Center City. Here's a close-up of such a colony. This shows light pollution in downtown Center City. And if you're a moth trying to find a mate, you may wind up a meal of a spider rather than a mate. And that's an issue for mating, except the female bagworm has a way of figuring out how to avoid that problem. The female bagworm never leaves her bag. She spends her, as a caterpillar, she walks around with that bag, and then when she matures to spin her cocoon, she attaches her bag to this branch, and she metamorphosizes inside the bag. But she never metamorphosizes into a moth. She really stays like a grub, and she releases through that bag pheromones which attract males, and the males will fly in from another hatch from another bag and land on her bag and insert their abdomen through the hole in the bottom of the bag and telescope their abdomens into the bag. The males fly only during the day, so they're not going to be attracted to light at night. And they never eat, so they don't have to worry about being attracted to flowers or to bait. So they land on this bag. They're on the outside, the female's on the inside. She lays her eggs inside the bag after she's fertilized. She then drops out of the bag. The eggs stay in the bag, and the next season, the caterpillars leave the bag and disperse. Well, she's not going ever to be caught in the spider web, but the spider web serves the mating interests of the spider, because this spider is attracted to light. This bridge spider, she builds her webs around light. The males don't make their own webs, so they're attracted to the webs of the females. So the light becomes a meeting place for bridge spiders to eat, meet, and mate. And here's the bridge spider, close up. And here she is mated. And if you find spider webs under eaves where they're protected, you'll often see that they have mated, and these egg sacs are right by the light. Now, what about eastern fireflies? How does this light pollution affect them? The amazing thing is that the common eastern firefly does fine despite this light pollution. The female lands on a blade of grass and emits a signal in response to males, and they mate in downtown Philadelphia. And they're able to mate because the flash is coated, and so the firefly doesn't mistake a prolonged light for its mate. And the light pollution may actually benefit this firefly because its arch enemy is another firefly that mimics it, that produces a signal that attracts the males. And when the males fly to that firefly eats the males. They call them femme fatales. And that firefly doesn't like light pollution. So the light pollution may, theoretically anyway, offer this firefly a refuge downtown. Now, finding a mate amidst the concrete is a problem for many insects, but they have tricks. And this black locust tree is the host of a black locust borer beetle. Here's the beetle, and it has a problem finding mates. For one thing, it's part of a mimicry complex, so that its mates are potentially easily confused. There's the locust borer beetle. So its opportunities for finding mates are limited. It doesn't have the access to the internet that human beings have. And it doesn't have pheromones like the praying mantis has, long distance pheromones. So what happens is that this beetle meets and mates on goldenrod. And here it's attracted to goldenrod and has found a mate. But that's a problem in Center City because here's goldenrod in the middle. You can see it. But goldenrod downtown has to compete with an introduced plant, which is mugwort. And mugwort is displacing goldenrod. And sometimes it completely squeezes out goldenrod. And in places like this, I've never found breeding those wood boring beetles. These paper wasps are in the same mimicry complex as the borer beetles. And here you see the males have been stuffed in, the females stuff them in to keep the males from stealing the food that they bring back to feed the young. But eventually the males disperse from the nests and try to unite with females, which also disperse, but they're part of the same mimicry complex and they can't use visual sighting that well either. So what they do is they congregate in leks. That is, lots of males clump together, and together their sexual signals are amplified just by their sheer numbers. And that's how females find them. And when females come, they pick and choose among the males. This is a Fairmont Dam, which interferes with shad moving upstream to their mating places, and also interferes with the American eel, which moves upstream to mature, but moves downstream, avoiding the dam, to mate. And all American eels congregate as adults in the Sargasso Sea in the Atlantic Ocean. And here they congregate, spawn, and die. And their offspring are brought back by currents back to the continent, and they migrate up the rivers and sexually mature, and the cycle repeats. But they're endangered because of climate change. Once the Gulf Stream Gulf Stream is intercepted, they'll have no way of returning back home. This is a plot of American eels that were radio tagged and swam from Nova Scotia to the Sargasso Sea. And you see the Gulf Stream, and once that's gone, these American eels will not be able to continue their life cycle. This is a heat island, and that potentially affects the turtles, which have temperature-dependent sexual determination. So when the temperature is above 84 degrees, this is a female about to lay eggs. So when she does lay her eggs, the incubation temperature will determine the sex of her young. So if in a laboratory, at least, when the temperature is above 84, females are produced, and below 84, males are reproduced. So the concern is that with global warming and with heat islands, the males will disappear. Well, presumably what will happen is that in this case is that the females, when they lay eggs, will start laying them earlier in the season to produce more males, but we don't know that that will happen. So time will tell. This is Broad Street, and I show it just because streets are probably the single greatest barrier to mating in Center City. And for a garter snake, garter snakes track their mates by pheromones. The mates leave a pheromone, and the male garter snakes follow the pheromone trail, and streets interfere with that pheromone trail. In addition, they the snake, when it crosses a street, becomes a target for cars. Cars like to run over snakes. And in areas where there are a lot of roads, populations of snakes have declined. The same is true with toads. This is the last, I think, of my organisms, mushrooms. Mushrooms mate through their mycelia, which are underground, microscopic, and the mycelia double as ways of getting nutrition. And when the mycelia cross, they of two different from two different organisms, the nuclei from one will go into the other, and they stay separated, but still united within the one organism, but not combined. They don't combine until later within the head of the mushroom. So the head of the mushroom is where the final unification of the two genomes occur. And in this one, the mushroom lasts for about a day, and that enables the mushroom to complete its mating quickly before it's trampled upon or molested. The interesting thing about mushrooms mating is that they don't have like two sexes like male and female, but they have mating types. And they don't have two mating types, but they have thousands of mating types. So that the chance that a mushroom will be of a different mating type is very high when it meets a strange mushroom. So in conclusion, reproductive diversity in the city is critical to the biodiversity in the city. And you can observe this reproductive diversity close to home. Thank you.
Thank you, Ken. That was great. So we can take questions. I just want to say that the first thing I saw in the chat early on in your talk was a comment, beautiful photographs. So did you take a lot of them?
Yes, I took all the photographs except those that were marked as credited to others. But probably in this presentation, probably 90% of the photographs were mine. Yes.
And are these all in the book, by the way? Most of the photographs?
Most of the organisms that I discussed here are in the book, but I included some organisms that are not in the book, like the Carolina geranium is not in the book. On the other hand, the book has many organisms that I didn't talk about tonight.
Well, the first question has to do with the milkweed aphids. Are they all clones?
Yes, the milkweed aphid produces giant super clones, and it is amazing that this aphid has been able to be so widespread despite the fact of its clonal origin, lack of genetic diversity.
Someone just was asking if a recording would be available later, so I'll just say yes, we're recorded, and remind people that it does take us a few weeks because we have to edit the recordings, but it gets posted on the Wagner's YouTube channel. Next question. Are these phenomenon, for example, dandelions not pollinating, mainly confined to cities? And if so, has there been research on how proximity to urban environments correlates to these changes?
Great question. In the case of dandelion, there have been Herculean efforts to find sexually reproducing dandelions in North America, and they have all failed. As far as we know, all dandelions in North America reproduce asexually. But in Europe, where there are sexual and asexual dandelions, there is a hint that in cities, the asexual dandelions are more likely to occur than outside of cities.
So thank you, Dr. Frank. This person says it's probably hard to generalize, but are there recommendations you would make for how we can support wildlife in the city?
Yes, it's something that I care about, and I'm glad you asked, because I hope that by showing you how these plants and animals struggle to reproduce, maybe you'll get some empathy for them and hope that they can do their thing. The best way is to tolerate some disorder. So avoid herbicides, avoid insecticides, allow plots to go rampant, avoid manicured gardens. The more you can allow these plants and animals to be on their own, the better. Now, against that is the concern that, well, then you'll have monocultures of mugwort. So sometimes you have to do some management, but in general, allowing plants to do their own thing and animals to do their own thing is the way to go.
This is a question about the praying mantis. Can the females move about a city on foot in order to find hospitable environments? And if so, do you know how far they can travel?
Um, yeah, they can crawl. And the question is, if you're in a urban habitat surrounded by brick and mortar, are they going to be motivated? You know, what's to draw them to climb a brick wall? They may be stimulated to avoid doing that. And, you know, it's a good question. It'd be fun for a student to actually monitor that and see if a praying mantis that doesn't have enough food, a female, whether she will actually try crawling away, even if the habitat she's crawling on is inhospitable.
This is a question about the red-tailed hawks. How were the individual male red-tailed hawks identified? And how was it determined that the first red-tailed hawk male mentioned was struck and killed on the expressway?
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that. I'm guessing that there was some witnesses, but I don't know the answer. I'm not a real expert on the hawks. By the way, if you're interested in learning more about that kind of question, there's a website, Facebook webpage called Franklin Hawkaholics, which is filled with information on the red-tailed hawks, and it dates back to the time that there was a webcam on the Franklin Institute. So I encourage you to check out Franklin Hawkaholics Facebook page.
I will say, one of the nestlings, I was at a meeting at the Franklin Institute up on the top floor, and you could look out the window and see the baby hawk.
Ah,
Yeah, it was amazing. I don't see any other questions. Anybody have another question? I will say that there's many fans of yours on this session, and they say always wonderful to see you and listen to you. Great presentation. Thank you so much.
thank you.
So thanks everyone for joining us. Ken, thank you so much for a wonderful talk and for sharing
pleasure.
your work. And we look forward to seeing you at the Wagner in person some point, and all the rest of you have a good night and come see us in person too. Thank you, everyone.
Thank
Good
you.
night.
Good night.